Well, hello once more, and welcome to another study of God's Word. In this lesson, we are going to be taking a look at the 5th Psalm. Now, some text just has so much material in it, so many thoughts, that I find it impossible to cover in one brief lesson. And so we are going to, over the next few lessons, look at this particular psalm. And in this video, we will be looking at particularly at Psalm 5, verses 1 through 3. But I want to begin with an overview of the psalm and a brief discussion kind of the theme of the psalm. The 5th psalm is a contrast between the righteous and the wicked, but also, and most importantly, it is a contrast between how God will deal with the wicked and how God does deal with the righteous. And so in the psalm, there are three parties being discussed. There is God himself, there is the righteous individual, and then there is the wicked, who are discussed largely as a group. But let us begin by reading the 5th Psalm, and then I'm going to present a little bit of an outline of the text. The psalm is said to be to the choir master for the flutes. That's how the ESV renders that particular word, and a psalm of David. Give ear to my words, O Lord, consider my groaning. Give attention to the sound of my cry, my King and my God. For to you do I pray. O Lord, in the morning you hear my voice. In the morning I prepare a sacrifice for you and watch. For you are not a God who delights in wickedness. Evil may not dwell with you. The boastful shall not stand before your eyes. You hate all evildoers. You destroy those who speak lies. The Lord abhors the bloodthirsty and deceitful man. But I, through the abundance of your steadfast love, will enter your house. I will bow down toward your holy temple in the fear of you. Lead me, O Lord, in your righteousness because of my enemies. Make your way straight before me. For there is no truth in their mouth. Their inmost self is destruction. Their throat is an open grave. They flatter with their tongue. Make them bear their guilt, O God. Let them fall by their own counsels. Because of the abundance of their transgressions, cast them out, for they have rebelled against you. But let all who take refuge in you rejoice. Let them ever sing for joy, and spread your protection over them, that those who love your name may exult in you. For you bless the righteous, O Lord. You cover him with favor as with a shield. If I was going to outline this psalm, I would say, first of all, verses 1 through 3 could be called the morning prayer. Verses 4 through 6 deal with the purity of God. Verses 7 and 8 deal with the desire of the righteous. Verses 9 and 10 are about the guilt of the wicked. And then finally, verses 11 and 12 are the joy and blessings of the righteous. As you look at the structure of the psalm, it is useful to me to kind of consider the first 3 verses, which are the morning prayer, and then the last 2 verses, the joy and blessings of the righteous, as being bookends. And contained within these 2 bookends, the prayer and the blessings, we have 3 brief essays on the 3 parties involved. There is the discussion of God, the discussion of the righteous, and then the discussion of the wicked. And through all of this, the overarching theme is the character of God and how God deals with various individuals. And he deals with them justly and rightly based upon his nature and based upon their own desires and behavior. Now, in this particular meditation, we're going to just focus on the first 3 verses, that portion which I have labeled the morning psalm, or the morning prayer, rather. And we're going to go through each part. We're going to go through each verse, and we're going to look at some particular words and thoughts, and then finally we will conclude with an application of these three verses. The psalmist says, "Give ear to my words, O Lord. Consider my groaning. Give attention to the sound of my cry." Now this is repetition, one of the elements of Hebrew poetry. We have basically the same idea worded in three different ways. My words, my groaning, my cry. And as we look at these, we understand that these are different terms the psalmist is using to describe the act of prayer. Now, first of all, the word, or the first phrase, "give ear to my words," reminds us that prayer involves words. Prayer is not just the utterance of an emotion. You can't go out in the woods and feel a prayer and have it be a proper prayer. You can't just burn incense and consider that a prayer. Prayer must involve, as Paul says to the Corinthians, the spirit and the understanding. The heart must be involved, yes, but also the mind. Prayer requires words. Then we have that term that the ESV denotes as groaning. Other translations will say meditation or lament. The idea in the Hebrew is this is a soft mutter, murmur, whisper. Prayer doesn't have to be loud. Prayer needs to be heartfelt. And so the word groaning may denote, the Hebrew might denote some amount of sorrow or lament, but it basically just means a soft, whispered, heartfelt utterance. And so the prayer involves words, it involves the heart and the emotion, and it doesn't have to be loud or even out loud. And some commentators have suggested that in this word, the psalmist may be suggesting he's not praying out loud. It's the feelings and the words of the heart. And then finally we have the cry. Now cry is just what it sounds like. It's a more of a louder form of speech or utterance. And so we have one word which denotes softness, and then we have another word which denotes loudness. And both the softness and the loudness have some suggestion of the emotion involved. And so again, taken all together, we are again reminded that we need to pray with the spirit, with the emotions, but also with the understanding. And so the psalmist is using these words, David is using these words to help us to understand the nature of prayer. As he is praying, we notice to whom he is praying. He says he's praying to the Lord, he's praying to his king, and he's praying to his God. Now what's interesting here is that David is himself a king. Now we don't actually know if David was king when he wrote this. But David became a king, and yet even as a king, he himself was subject to a higher king who was God. God, and in the New Testament Christ, is the King of Kings, meaning he is the Lord or the King who presides over other kings. He is the ultimate authority. And David, as he makes his prayers, is recognizing the authority and the sovereignty of God. David, as he prays, says in verse 3, "Lord, in the morning you hear my voice. In the morning I prepare a sacrifice for you." Now again, we have repetition, this time only twice, but it's the same word, the morning. David is not waiting to the conclusion of the day to spend time with God. He is beginning the day with God. And as he makes the prayer in the morning, he concludes with, "I'm going to then watch." He's going to spend the rest of the day anticipating God's answer to the prayer. Prayer is something we should do not at the conclusion of our activities, or not just solely at the conclusion, but prayer should initiate our activities, and our activities should be done waiting and watching for God to be working in our lives and answering our prayers even as we go about our lives. So David was going to begin the day with prayer. He also says something interesting. Now the ESV says, "In the morning I prepare a sacrifice for you." And the Hebrew words here very much suggest the arrangement of the wood on the altar as the priest prepared a sacrifice in the morning. Some take this to mean that as David was praying, he was praying at the temple, or in this case, in David's lifetime, it would have been at the tabernacle, but praying at the tabernacle as the priests were preparing the sacrifices. But it could also just be taken that David is saying, I am giving thought in arrangement to my prayer. Prayer doesn't have to be a haphazard occasion. Prayer can be done in an orderly fashion, and David is suggesting his prayers were orderly. Again, from 1 Corinthians, Paul says, let everything be done decently and in order. It is not wrong to think upon your prayers before you give them, and to arrange them in a logical and reasonable way. God knows our hearts, but at the same time, as we are communicating to God, we should give thought to what we want to say so that we better understand our own hearts and our words are more reflective of God's will for our hearts. And then finally, and this is kind of where I want to leave us with this thought, David says, in the morning you hear my voice. David is praying, but notice that as he is praying to God, he is assured that God is listening. Now, as we go through the rest of the psalm, we're going to see why David believes that God is listening. He's going to talk about God's character and about his own desires in relationship to God. But as we think about God and we think about prayer, if we are the people of God, we need faith that God is a God who listens to our prayers. We are not just speaking to the wind. We're not just voicing our thoughts and our heart's desires to an empty room. The prayers rise higher than the ceiling. They rise to God who is listening. And in fact, in the first verse, when David says, give ear to my words, O Lord, the wording there in Hebrews is suggestive of put your hand to your ears so you can hear me. Not that God needs to listen better, but David is just wanting God to pay attention, but he's assured that God is paying attention. Again, God is a God who listens to prayers. But if that is the case, then the application to us from these first three verses is that we need to be a people of prayer. We need to pray with words. We need to pray when our heart is troubled. We need to pray when we are emotional or excited. We need to pray in the morning. We need to pray without ceasing. We need to be a people who go to God regular in prayer. When we look at righteous men throughout the Bible, one common feature that is often brought to our attention is these were men of prayer. We see Jesus going early in the morning to pray to God, praying to God late through the night. We see Daniel going into his room to pray 3 times a day. We see Cornelius in Acts chapter 10 being commended by God for praying continually. Paul tells us, pray without ceasing. Again and again, God tells us he wants us to be a people of prayer and that he is a God who listens to prayer. In our next few studies through the Psalms, we will look at the other verses 4 through 12 of this psalm. In the meantime, I hope that this study on the first 3 verses has been of benefit to you and given you some things to think about. Until our next time together, God bless you and you have a great day.